Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Tuesday, and the face you see there is not Dwayne Long. We've changed things up. That is the lovely visage of Pro Football Focus Anthony Treash. He's here today to answer a ton of questions on the Buckeyes. We've got a whole list of things to go through. As we said, for those of you watching on the YouTube, on the Book of Face, or Twitter, please smash the like button, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Like we said, we've changed things up a little bit. Normally, Tuesdays have been Dwayne Long's territory forever, but through a variety of reasons, we're now going to mix it up. Our first new guy that we brought in here is Anthony Treash from Pro Football Focus. He's in Cincinnati. He's ready for the shrapnel. Anthony, how goes it?
It's going well. We're a few weeks out from football season, and when you're talking football, it doesn't matter if we're talking Tulane or Ohio State. I'm psyched up, but specifically with Ohio State, I mean, a lot of intrigue, obviously. I think they're a top 2 team nationwide, so I'm ready to dive into them.
So Anthony works for Pro Football Focus, and before we get started, Pro Football Focus has kind of grown in the last decade or so to be kind of a main staple of those who follow football. It's kind of the analytical side, the more behind-the-scenes side for those who like a more detailed bite at the apple. Kind of explain to people what you do there. And then the project we're going to talk about today that you worked on is you rank the top 25 players in college football at every position. Shocker, the people on this show are going to be interested in a certain few, where they rank, where they don't, and we'll go into that. But first, you have a couple interesting distinctions in the way you rank people. So kind of talk about what you do there and then this specific project.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk hours about what we do here at PFF, but at least for my main responsibilities, I'm the lead college analyst here. So I handle all the college content stuff that you see put out there, all the final rankings that are also sent to teams. And that's kind of where I handle all of that. But then I also do some behind the scenes stuff that I can't talk too much about, but working with other business partners, mainly with the broadcast networks, and when I have time, kind of apply whatever I can to that area. So that's kind of the general synopsis of what I do here. But general PFF, for those who don't know, we're contracted out to every NFL team, every Power 5 program, almost every single FBS program now, owned by Chris Collinsworth. And what we do, we provide analytical services. And a lot of people think that it's just the premium stats that they can get and subscribe to over at pff.com, but there's an entire database, that are for the teams. Really premium stats is just a couple percent of what we really have to offer here at PFF, and that's where the teams come in, and we can marry in the tape with the data to make it a little bit easier for them. So when they're back in the day, you'd cut the tape, you have these guys working all these crazy hours. Now we can do it in seconds. So that's the good thing about our database. It helps me in my day-to-day job and helps me when I'm formulating these rankings every year for college football. It's one of my favorite times of the year, the couple of weeks where I get to sit down and really focus my time on that. And I put out a top 10 after a little early top 10 after the 2021 season, and after the national title game, and then extended that list to top 25 and top 50 for the quarterbacks, top returning players at every position. Should have mentioned that. So yeah, I do a variety of stuff, but that's kind of the general thing, what we do here at PFF and what I do.
So for the rankings you have that we're going to discuss today, there's an important distinction on there that these are not NFL projections. So can you go into, obviously you're using, the evaluations are based on film. You guys have access to all the tape, the coach's tape, I might add. And then you go from there. Talk about the distinction. What criteria are you using to rank the guys? If it's not the NFL, it's not a projection of their talent long-term. I assume that means just how you think they're going to perform this year, which is going to be important because the first one we're going to start off with is going to put the tide against my friend here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I tell everybody this with these rankings. I formulate this list off of if I am an average FBS team and I get to pick anyone at a certain position, who am I picking in what order? So, it's not necessarily in the case of Ohio State. Like CJ Stroud is perfect for Ohio State and what they need to do. But if I'm an average FBS team, right? Let's say, I don't know. Let's go Minnesota.
Purdue.
I think Purdue. I like Purdue. I think they're a little.
All right, Minnesota.
Yeah, that's a good one. Minnesota. I think they're kind of above average too. But yeah, if I'm one of those two programs, who am I taking? Right? In what order? That's how I formulate all these lists. And I think that can kind of get lost in there because a lot of people just, kind of look at how they're performing in a certain situation, but not all situations are equal, right? So that's the way I kind of do it. And, the pro projection aspect of it, like, you know, Grayson McCall, for example, Coastal Carolina quarterback, he's a top 10 quarterback in this ranking, but when it comes draft time next year, somebody may give him a look, but he's not going to be a highly regarded prospect. He's just good at what he does there. And I think you can build an offense around him if you are, say in this situation, an average FBS team. You can build something around his skill set. Very mobile. He fits that triple option offense, but he also has a very accurate arm that can hit those downfield throws to take the top off the defense. Really stresses him, right? So, I mean, that's why he's a top 10 guy there. But, obviously in the NFL, it's going to be a little bit different there. So that's how I formulate all these lists.
Okay, let's start at the top. The top quarterbacks you ranked. Number 1, Bryce Young from Alabama. Number 2, Caleb Williams of USC. I think there are plenty of people who could accept those arguments. Number 3, Spencer Rattler of South Carolina. Number 4, CJ Stroud. So based on the criteria you just laid out, I don't think there's any, I think it's fair to say there's no NFL team that would pick Spencer Rattler tomorrow over CJ Stroud. I think as of right now, as we sit here, the NFL draft, we think is going to be between Stroud and Young. Now, obviously, there's usually a couple guys who can pop up in this year, but generally speaking, that's the vibe right now. You have Rattler, who ostensibly flamed out at Oklahoma in the number 3 spot. So kind of go through your criteria and why you have CJ at number 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's less about me. Like, I like CJ Stroud. Like, I think he's a great quarterback. I think he should be considered a first-round prospect right now if we're talking pro projection stuff. It's less about me not liking him for some reason. Like, 4th out of 130, that's 97th, 98th percentile.
Sure.
That's one of the best in college football. I think there's a clear, distinct tier with those top 4 guys, and I think there's a little bit of a gap there. Number 5 being Sam Hartman, and that goes back to the whole pro projection stuff.
Sure.
Again, I think you can build something around his skill set, but for the NFL, maybe not so much. But I mean, the difference between those two, Rattler and Stroud, it's more about Spencer Rattler just being incredibly underrated, in my opinion. I mean, if he's at 127 other FBS programs last year, he's a starter from start to end, right? And who's to say that this season continues to go the way it was? And honestly, it wasn't going as bad, right? I mean, this was a team that was trying to win the national title. This was still a good football team that hadn't lost the game yet. And when Spencer Rattler was starting over the last couple of years for him, they're 15-2. They won a Big 12 championship. I mean, what more could you ask for, really? I mean, he's actually our highest graded quarterback in our database since 2020. And really, again, the difference between the two, why I would take Rattler over Stroud, is just I think you can get that for an average FBS team. You need a little bit of that playmaking instinct. And that's not to say CJ Stroud doesn't have that. He's just in a situation where he needs to be a facilitator, and he's a fantastic facilitator for that offense, right? I mean, he just needs to hit the open receiver. They have exceptional route runners there. They did last year. They still will this year. They're good at scheming receivers open as well. Just kind of hitting that open receiver there and just being the facilitator of the offense, right? And you really do see, I mean, this is a vertical passing offense, right? This is where those are the most passing concepts we see from this Ohio State team. I mean, really, that's kind of you look at passing concepts in general, most teams, your most used one is going to be vertical just because that's kind of its own big, broad bucket. But Ohio State pushes the ball vertically, and CJ Stroud's an excellent vertical passer. I think he's an excellent throw shaper. I think there's some stuff he does have to work on just a little bit. And again, it's kind of being nitpicky a little bit. It's like he will get forceful from time to time, and it kind of shows up on a game-to-game basis. Nebraska's one, Michigan's one, but, those were kind of situations where he had to be. Of course, early on in the year, Oregon was one that popped up. I think he could be a little bit more consistent with his mechanics. And again, he had the 5th lowest rate, I think, if I recall correctly, 5th lowest rate of tight window throws last year in the entire Power 5, which is typical for an Ohio State quarterback. And his accuracy rate improved dramatically from that first 3-game stretch, sat out that game against Tulsa, and then the rest of the year. Obviously, I think the shoulder had a part of that. I also think he did clean up a little bit of his mechanics, but I still want to see him kind of clean up his core a little bit. I want him to kind of use that. He really does lack core control. There's too many finishes where, think of a baseball pitcher, right? When he's releasing that ball, I mean, that's where you kind of see CJ Stroud from time to time. You can see the ball kind of sail a little bit. I think he can be a little bit more consistent and, hit some of those easier misses. So I think we did see some growth too, just from throwing from, going from first to second read last year and, staying calm and being comfortable. And I will say one of the most underrated things about him is his pocket presence. It's excellent. A lot of people knock him for not running with the ball. He doesn't need to in this offense, right? I think he can do it. He just doesn't have to. He said that. But with Spencer Rattler, I think CJ Stroud's very talented, but I think Spencer Rattler's just a little bit more talented. You know what I mean? And he has rare arm talent. Really rare arm talent. And you look at what he did in 2020, he had a 9% big time throw rate, one of the highest in college football. This past year, CJ Stroud was very high in that category, but it was 6%. So, I mean, that's kind of the difference we're talking there. And I think Spencer Rattler, con on him, is kind of a strength for Stroud, is just being willing to play inside the structure of the offense. Spencer Rattler's kind of that gamer, but what he can do out of the pocket is special stuff, right? And I think what we did see in 2020 in the first start, and I almost want to throw out 2021 because I think there was a clear lack of trust between Lincoln Riley and Rattler. Because we could look at the data too, the heat maps. You can see there were less downfield opportunities called for Rattler in 2021 than 2020 because he wanted Rattler. He was trying to force him to be a little bit more willing to play inside the structure of the offense. Check the ball down, take what the defense gives him. It was interesting because Caleb Williams, that's his biggest weakness too. It's even more so than I think Spencer Rattler's is. And we did see that from time to time last year, the one being Kansas before he kind of saved the day at the end of the fourth quarter. But again, I think what Rattler can do, that playmaking ability, it's special. And I think that's just what puts me above, a little bit more than Stroud. And I think we will see a more, I would say, I'm not going to say he's complete, but I think we'll see a Spencer Rattler that is very much cleaned up in a pro-style offense, which he will have at South Carolina. And I think that's where you're going to see the best of both worlds. And I think you're really going to see him excel down there for Shane Beamer. So, again, it's splitting hairs. Like, I'm not going to say you're crazy for having CJ Stroud above Rattler. Everybody does. I'm the only one that does it. That's just my opinion. And even if you have CJ Stroud number one, I can see a case for it, right? But it's just kind of preference there. And I think you could I have Caleb Williams and Rattler right there. I really do think they're different quarterbacks just from like a physical profile sense, but kind of the same in the way they play the game and the upside they both have. And then I think Bryce Young, I think he's probably as complete as you can find at least in college football right now, right? He's not like Trevor Lawrence complete the way he was a few years ago. He's like as a true freshman, but the only knocks you can really find with him are his size, which he can't really do much about. He can add some more muscle in his footwork, but the footwork's not an issue at the collegiate level. In the NFL level, I guarantee if it doesn't change, for a year from now, we're going to hear all about it from anonymous scouts, right? Quarterback coaches hate his footwork, whatever. But that's the order I have. And again, I think that's kind of the clear, distinct elite tier of options that I would want to choose from. And I don't think you're crazy if you have Stroud number one. It's just preference there. He's a great quarterback.
Okay, so now when those types of rankings come out and they're not yours, I think the assumption is from a lot of Bucknutters is that people do that kind of stuff to get eyeballs because they know Ohio State's fans come in droves. So if you put CJ at number 4, you're going to get some calling card action on that. I think everyone should understand, Anthony, this is his opinion. There's some of you who weren't able to follow part of that. So this dude is looking at all the film. If you don't agree with him, that's fine. But this is not, I wanted you to do that first. So it's clear that you aren't just using the brand to drive up page views, which happens. And I'm sure you've seen that among your competition, that sometimes they'll go for a headline with the Buckeyes in it to kind of draw eyeballs. And then when you get in there, it's not as harsh, or you can see they were just lassoing you in for those reasons. Let's move on to some of the other guys. Like I said, Anthony has done the top 25 at every position, and there are several Buckeyes in there. I want to get to what turns out to be the strength of the team according to your rankings. That is offensive tackle. I think most people assume Paris Johnson would be the better of the two. You got Paris Johnson moving to the left this year. DeJuan Jones obviously starting on the right. Paris kicking out for the most part. They let Nick Petitfrere run the left side last year. So Paris, a natural left tackle, obviously, the blind side prototype, number one guy in his class. From Cincinnati, by the way, possibly located near Mr. Treash here. I don't want to get your Ohio ties in. We're going to start a whole new thing about how Cincinnati doesn't support the Buckeyes after the last one. So I don't want to even open another can of worms there. But you actually have DeJuan Jones ranked as the number 2 overall tackle and Paris Johnson number 5. That's 2 of the top 5 tackles in the United States. That's good stuff. Talk about those 2 guys. You may also be the only one who has DeJuan ranked ahead of Paris. And obviously, we're splitting hairs of greatness here, but maybe let people into how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, if we were picking on, like, you have one player for the next 5 years, I would probably take Paris Johnson. I have no problem with that. I would take Paris Johnson. I think he has a far higher ceiling. But again, like, we're looking at week 1 average team. Who am I taking? And DeJuan Jones, I think, more than proven that he can be. He is, I think, one of the best, if not the best, run blocker in college football. I mean, he's actually the largest starter in college football. I looked it up. I was curious one day, and there's no one larger than him. He's 6'8", 360. I mean, the guy's a mammoth out there, and it shows up in the run game. It was a huge asset last year. Now, he's not the best pass protector, right? I mean, and that has to do with his size, right? When you're that large of a human being, you're going to have some issues, especially with some of those more nimble guys, right? You have a tendency to play a little too high, but running the ball at the collegiate level is valuable. I think a lot of people think PFF, they're like, oh, they don't like running backs. I don't think they should play the game or whatever. But at the NFL level, it's different than the collegiate level. The collegiate level, running the ball matters a lot. And if you have guys that can consistently make their blocks and, not, blow up a play, that's very valuable. And that's DeJuan Jones to me. With Paris Johnson, I mean, like you said, top 5, you look at the entire FBS, and if you consider swing tackles, you have over 300 tackles you're evaluating. So 5th out of 300 is pretty dang good. Last year I thought he was better than I even thought he would be. 16th in the Power 5 in PFF grade, and like you said, moving out to left tackle, that's where he's more natural there. I think he's going to excel there. And honestly, this entire, like, if we had to rank the positions just based off of strength, I would put running back, just give an example. That's number 1. That's the most talented position in college football, in my opinion. Tackle's probably near the bottom. I think it's a little bit weaker. We also saw a couple of guys that maybe will play tackle, but they're moving inside just because, from the NFL perspective, that's where th're going to get moved to. So they want to get action there and show they can play there. Andrew Voorhees, USC, for example, he's one. For initial rankings, he was over at tackle. New one, he's interior offensive line. He's more than likely sticking at guard. And so I think tackle's a little bit weaker there. But that's not to say that this is the best tackle duo in college football. I think Ohio State should be pretty excited with what they have, because you look at some of the teams in the Big Ten, it's really rough at that position. And honestly, some of the teams up top, I mean, that's going to be the make or break of really their season. Alabama, for example, I know they brought in Tyler Steen, the Vanderbilt transfer, but he's replacing Evan Neal, the top 10 pick. And that's a pretty big difference there, considering the rest of the state of the offensive line. That could be an issue. Texas, they have a high upside. Everyone's maybe saying they're a sleeper team, but tackles are really, really rough. So, I mean, that's a good situation to have there for Ohio State.
No question. And then the draft will be another adventure entirely, because I'd be really surprised if either one of them was back at Ohio State next year, just based on what you said and their chance to shine this year. All right, let's flip it. Okay, let's talk running back. This is definitely not a projection of the pros, because the guy you have at number 1 is 5'6". You have Travian Henderson, I believe, 2 or 3. I'm not sure what needs to be seen from him. I'd like to see a little more wiggle out of Travian. He is in a straight line. He's as explosive of a running back as I have ever followed. I mean, he gets 0 to 60 in a heartbeat. I'm not sure he breaks as many tackles as you'd like just yet, but, he's a young back who, the pandemic kind of took his senior year of high school. Your thoughts on Travian? He is your second team. He's on second team All-American, which is he's a top 4 back.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned Deuce Vaughn, pro projection. He is the exact reason why I said this is not a pro projection. I thought that would kind of be implied, but I was like, people are taking this the wrong way, because you see a graphic on Twitter, Deuce Vaughn, like, Yeah, I mean, he's going to get drafted, right? People are going to call him Tyrone Sproles. We're going to hear that until he gets picked next April. But he's not going to be first round, maybe, when guys like Bijan has a very good chance of being first round. But
being a first round draft to get running backs a challenge these days for anybody.
Exactly, and rightfully so. But at running back in college football, Deuce Vaughn, he more than proven. I think he would, if I pick anybody, it's him. I think the reason I'll go off before I hit on Travian Henderson. Like the reason why running backs are valuable in college football is just you look at just the sheer talent, right? Like Deuce Vaughn, electric player, exceptional athlete. He's going to be playing some guys that won't be playing football in a couple of years, right? They're going to be working another job. And in the NFL, you're playing against guys that are professionals. It's a completely different ball game. But when you have a guy that has the upper hand at the running back position, just from a pure physical talent perspective, just who you are as an athlete, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's where you can kind of get the value there. But with Travian Henderson, I thought last year, freshman, he was one of the most explosive backs in college football. And that makes me very excited for Ohio State and what they have there for the next couple of seasons with him. Like you said, true home run hitter, right? And I think what really impressed me last year was just his vision and his ability to set up blocks, right? You do want to see him kind of break the tackles on his own, but he is exceptional at kind of creating his own lanes. And I do think that, one of the biggest issues you see with some of those younger guys, just kind of giving up on a play they're not going to give up on a play. I probably shouldn't say that, but just kind of making an impact and fighting to keep going when something goes off of the plan. But when Travian Henderson's out on the field, we look at, we developed a metric here, our R&D department led by Eric Eager, good friend of mine here, perfectly blocked and non-perfectly blocked run plays. You look at non-perfectly blocked run plays, which essentially is at least one blocker lost. They messed up. They blew up their assignment. Travian Henderson was the best in college football last year, and the 5.9 yards per carry. The FBS average 3.2, I recall correctly. And, everyone else, you have some other Big Ten backs there, but they're like 5.1, 5.2, and that's like the top 5. So he's exceptional in that area. And, I really do think that just given what he did last year, his first year there is quite impressive. So I really do think that if you told me he won the Doak Walker this year, would not be surprised in the slightest bit. If you told me he was in New York, would not be surprised.
Yep. Yeah, he's got that kind of talent. He was the number 1 overall player at his position when they got him, and that speed he has is just rare speed. That's Olympic level speed. There's a difference. Everybody says they run a 4.4, and most good guys with the stopwatch will not tell you what the time is because it's not going to be as high as it should be based on public interpretation. But that is a legitimate 4.3, 4.4, 4x1 speed, and it's valuable.
I will say, out of all the college players, I haven't seen TreVeyon yet. My hope's to see him soon. Just see him in person. Out of all the college players I've seen live, it's probably Justin Fields, Zeke Elliott, Aiden Hutchinson. I'd say that's the top 3. The best I've ever seen. I'm in Big Ten country, so more Big Ten football than anything. But I think TreVeyon, if I'm getting a guess, he's probably going to get close to that top.
I don't think he'll ever be Zeke in that Zeke was a unique breed of cat and that he was the best pass blocking running back I've ever seen and has done it again at the pro level. He was a rare breed of cat, as the last time we hosted the title, by the way, who was the MVP. So things work out the way they should. All right, let's talk about Ohio State's current calling card, and that is wide receiver. Jackson Smith-Njigba. You're actually now gone against the grain because you don't have the dude from LSU. I think it's Kayvon Boutte above him. That might be a pro projection. And then nobody else in Ohio State's receiving core makes your top 25. You do, however, I will say this, to be fair to Anthony here, he has a breakout player section, I think, to address the guys who have the talent but haven't had the snaps yet, maybe on film. Marvin Harrison makes that list. I could put Emeka Egbuka on there as well. I would not be surprised when all is said and done if Emeka Egbuka is actually, I'm not going to say more talented than Jackson Smith-Njigba, but he is a tremendous football player. But like everybody else, you have JSN number 1, like some other people. Just talk about the receiving core and what they're doing at Ohio State and just their overall talent level with Brian Hartline in there. If you're this close, I'm sure you're hearing plenty about it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the guy from LSU, Keishon Butte. He's definitely one of the best. He's up there, top 5 on my list. Hurt right now. Hopefully, he can get back on the field. But yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Honestly, I'll think back at that play. What was it, a couple years ago against Nebraska? That touchdown. You
In the end
saw.
zone.
Yep, you saw the
Where they had
ball
to
skills
replay that.
there.
We had to replay the feet.
Yep.
Even the ref couldn't believe it.
Yep, it was one of the best plays of the season. And from that point on, I was like, all right, this guy's going to be good. You see some of the clips, you see he's not a burner, right? He doesn't have that top end speed, but he has that short area quickness. He has the polish and he has the ball skills. We've more than seen that. And you hear, what he did at high school. Those are some of the traits that stood out. And you pair him with the best wide receiver coach in college football, you get the most advanced wide receiver in college football, Jackson Smith and Jigba. So undoubtedly, I think he's the best. And I think that's this one's different because like you can get some people that are going to argue it's either Jordan Addison, it's Butte, but honestly, I think I would argue tomorrow morning that it's Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's the best wide receiver in college football. And you mentioned no other wide receiver cracked the top 25. Like you said, if I do this ranking at the end of the season, I will. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 3 in the top 10. That's just how talented, but a little bit raw this is. I think Marvin Harrison Jr., he's one where honestly I would be surprised if he's not top 10. You did see just a little bit there, when he was on the field last year, you saw just, I'm not going to say he's going to be like his daddy. Obviously, that's a pretty big accomplishment to try to get there, but you saw
So different.
you saw a very advanced wide receiver, right? You saw the craftiness and just, the technique. It was just different for a guy that you see that gets a few snaps, right? Typically, you see a guy get a few snaps and they look lost out there. They're not ready. Marvin Harrison, he was like, you see it. He's getting there. He was just playing behind 3 first-round wide receivers, right? So, I definitely am bullish on what he has to offer this year. I think he's going to be an exceptional player for him. And like I said, I'd be surprised if he's not a top 10 player. So, I mean, you lose 2 guys to the first round, but this position group, it's still a very much a strength for Ohio State.
You could make an argument they lost 3 because Jameson Williams transferred out, and I'm glad we didn't have you on for that. The Jameson Williams over Jackson Smith Njigba et al. Argument lit up our message boards nicely last year. So, the transfer portal. Let's flip it to the defense. Actually, no, let's not. Let's start with finish with the interior offensive line. I think this is really encouraging, and I'm glad you mentioned this. If I had to say the most underrated player on Ohio State's football team right now, I might go with Luke Whippler, the center, who was thrown into action early in his career. You have him as the number 6 center, or number 6 interior offensive lineman across the board. Matt Jones at number 16. That's very impressive. Obviously, Donovan's a rookie, so he's not on there yet, a freshman, but talk about Luke Whippler. Center is actually a glory position at Ohio State if you look at the lineage. Corey Linsley just got paid. There are guys before that who have made serious money in the NFL. So what's funny is Corey Linsley actually sent in an application to a financial services company before the draft because he wasn't sure he was going to get drafted. If you want to know how things have changed from Tressel onto Urban to Ryan Day. But Luke Whippler is on his way to be the next great Ohio State center.
Yeah, I mean, strong, athletic, clean production. He was a top 15 graded player nationwide in the entire FBS at the position last year. And you just look at the, returning talent there. I mean, we worked pretty closely with the Rubington Trophy, with getting that, semifinalist list all, worked out there and helping him pick the preseason watch list. I mean, Whippler was definitely at the top of the conversation, right? Immediately threw his name up there. He's one of the top guys there. So it's definitely a strength there. And, you look at the guard spots, I think this is where I don't want to say it's like concerning at all. Like, I don't think it's going to ever be a point where if Ohio State hypothetically drops a game, you're going to point to the guard and say, they're the reason why I lost, right? I think their floor is a little bit lower. They still have a high ceiling, but their floor is lower than some of the other positions on offense. Obviously, I think you mentioned Jones. He's on the list. I think you look at the offensive line, the way it's set up, and it's DeJuan Jones and both of the Joneses, they have the same strengths, and I think they have the same weaknesses. And I think Jackson and Paris Johnson kind of have this similar strengths, but similar weaknesses, right? Jones, he's going to provide value in the run game, but the pass protection, what we did see last year, he kind of did look just lost out there. I think everything's got to improve with him, right? Awareness, hand usage, it's got to improve. Jackson, I mean, he's just a raw specimen, right? He has absurd traits, very long, very long limbs. I mean, superb length. I think the biggest thing from what we did get to see just a little bit, it was very limited. He did get a little overzealous, right? Just which you see that from time to time with some of those physically gifted young players, right? They're just eager to put some just put a guy on the ground, right? And they kind of lunge and get the nose over the toes and kind of get you off balance a little bit. But I think he'll work on that. So I think those guys are interesting. Again, high ceiling, but I think their floor might be a little bit lower than some of these guys. But overall, I think a lot of people just ridiculed this Ohio State offensive line last year. And I think you point to the Michigan game, but that was one of the best pass rush duos that I've seen, right?
Yep.
That we've really seen here at the DFF college era. Most of the offensive lines in college football over the last 5 years would have been the same thing, right? They would have had the same story there. But I think it was a good offensive line last year. I think they can be an elite offensive line this year.
Nice blend of kind of veteran experience and youthful excellence. Like you said, Johnson and Jackson are probably the best pro prospects in the group. And we're, first team McDonald's All-American types. All right. We're going to take a quick break for those on the podcast. What's my time here? Good Lord. We are crushing it today. 31. I'm going to have to give Anthony some extra cash for this visit. And we're back. So let's talk now. Let's flip to the defense. The biggest question I have is cornerback Denzel Burke. Go.
Yeah. So forming the top 25 corners list was tough because I think it's really top heavy. And then you could say the difference between like the fourth best guy and even the 35th is marginal. Right? And then when you look at the cornerback position, it's so volatile. Just because a guy was elite last year does not mean they're going to be elite this year. A la Derek Stingley Jr., injuries can pop up. There's some guys on there that have had some, bumpy paths so far in their collegiate careers, but they kind of turned some stuff around. Again, I think kind of the true elite guys like Eli Ricks was number one. Alabama, former LSU Tiger, transferred to Alabama this offseason.
Oh, we know.
Cam Smith, South Carolina corner, which when I first put out the list, nobody was talking about him. Now everybody has him as a top 10 prospect in terms of draft. But I think he's an elite player there for the Gamecocks. And then Clark Phillips, which the pro potential stuff.
One-time Ohio State commitment, Clark Phillips.
I know I had to mention those guys. I'm sorry. I don't mean to pull up some old wounds there for Ohio State fans, but yeah, I mean those are the kind of the top three. I think Denzel Burke. Again, if you told me he's top 5 at the end of the year, would not be surprised, right? And I think he's kind of follows the same suit as Travian Henderson, where it was just shocking at how well he performed as a true freshman. I mean, this was a guy that was getting recruited to play wide receiver by some schools, right? He was not. He was just still learning how to play corner. He was not supposed to play.
I believe they listed him as an athlete. He listed as a corner.
Yeah, he was not supposed to play corner last year, but they had to out of necessity, and not allowing a single touchdown with 10 combined pass breakups plus an interception. I mean, that's remarkable stuff. I think, too, what excites me about this cornerback room with him and Cameron Brown is that, they're going to – so I could talk a lot about the defensive scheme changes they're going to have. I mean, it's completely different under Jim Knowles and what it has been in the past. I mean, opposite ends of the spectrum. But, a lot of people think, okay, we play single high all the time. We used to. Now we're not. We're not going to play that much man coverage anymore. When you're actually Ohio State's going to be playing more man coverage. They're going to be playing probably like, I would say over 10% more than what they've normally played. And a lot of that has to do with a small increase in cover one, because with those safety rotations that they have there, when they do rotate, sometimes it's pretty popular with that 3 high system that you're going to, end up rotating to play cover one. But also there's a high rate of cover 0 there. So you need elite man corners. And these guys are man cover corners, right? That's where they excel. Denzel Burke, I think that's a testament to also his receiver background and just his overall athleticism. But Cam Brown, last year, I mean, that was just where he was more natural, right? You look at the numbers. I think it was 8 targets in man coverage, 1 reception allowed, 5 forced incompletions. Cam Brown's a man cover corner. He's great mirror ability, especially when he's playing that soft shoe press. He's exceptional. And I think that's what excites me about, possible improvement from this cornerback room. And I think that the sky's the limit for them this year. So again, I think this is a group where, it's not definitive as far as what we're going to see, but I'm confident that they're going to get there by the season's end. And I'm not going to be surprised if, even though they weren't there, in the top of that ranking, if they kind of etch their way closer to that.
Yeah, there's no linebackers in the group. Shocker. That's not shocking at all. And then for the defensive line, you've got Marvin Harrison. I knew I was going to do that. Zach Harrison at number 7, and then Jack Sawyer on your breakout list, and Tyleik Williams is on your breakout list and is also ranked somewhere. Just talk about their defensive line. I know Harrison was supposed to be the next in line. He's supposed to be the next, Chase Young and Bosa, and he has not materialized as that. This is just my opinion, but in order for Ohio State to win the national championship, some defensive line or the group is going to have to crank it up a notch. If you look at when Ohio State's really been a title threat, they've had a top 5 defensive end out there they're almost like erasers. You can make a lot of mistakes and this guy will just clean them up for you. I thought you made a point on Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo, what they did for Michigan last year. Completely different outfit. Michigan came in here with the number 1 defense before, but not that kind of talent, and Ohio State carved them up into shreds. So the fact that they had those guys made a huge difference. I really think if it's JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer, I don't think Zach Harrison has that upside, but I think they need someone into the, I just remember on 3rd and long, it was Bosa time. They need someone who, like on 3rd and long, fear is established. And I don't think they've had that. Do they have a chance to have it this year?
Yeah, so I mean, this is also like a good conversation as to far, like a lot of people may wonder why was the old defense working for so long and then it stopped working? It's because you didn't have a Chase Young anymore. You didn't have one of the Bosas. You didn't have a Jeff Okudah too paired with that, right? When you don't have those truly, truly elite, like special top 10 player, top 5 player, elite guys at corner and on the edge, then it makes stuff complicated when you're telling the offense, hey, you know what we're going to run here, but we have better players and we're just going to beat you anyway. You need to be a little bit more deceiving if you don't have those kind of guys. That's why it's really not working. I think you look at this defensive front. I'm not going to say any of these guys are going to be like a Chase Young or Bosa, but you talk about Aiden Hutchinson, like the difference between like at the Power 5 level, and this is where it also differs from the NFL and even the Group of 5, having an elite pass rusher is the same as having an elite corner. What happens with the pass rush on a given pass play, the output of the pass rush can explain what happens on a given pass play just as much as the output of a corner, right? I mean, because when you have those game wreckers that are just, again, it goes back to why the running backs matter in college football. Sure. It's just when you have the guys that are different, like Young and Bosa,
levels just succeeds.
Yeah, I mean, you can destroy an opposing offense's entire game plan. They were just lost. We saw it with Chase Young and Northwestern. They had to do everything differently. They didn't know what to do. With this group Ohio State has, you see a lot of potential there. It's just really not proven. And Zach Harrison, I think we know what he is at this point.
Yep.
He definitely was at one point the guy that, man, what could he be? But I think at this point we kind of know what he is, which is a very good pass rusher, a very good edge defender in general in college football. But he's hit or miss so much at this point where you're kind of expecting just inconsistency. He's consistently inconsistent, right? I mean, over half of his game, less than a couple pressures generated, but you have those moments where it's 7 or 8 pressures, right? And that's where you still have that elite production there. He's not getting a lot of sacks, but he's winning quite often. But still, there's too many games where he disappears. He's long and explosive, again, toolsy, but at this point you kind of know what he is. And you look at the other guys, though, that's where you can kind of get some excitement there. For me, I really like Tyleik Williams, the interior defensive lineman. I think, could be one of the best in college football, regardless of position. He was one, too, kind of like Henderson and Burke, where true freshmen last year, it's rare to see defensive linemen just hold their own, right? Yeah. I mean, let alone look a little bit advanced like Tyleik Williams did, just the upper body strength and also the hand placement. I thought it was well advanced, well beyond his years. I mean, he showed that game-wrecking ability. I'm not going to say he's going to be like Jalen Carter at Georgia, who's going to be a game wrecker this year for the Bulldogs, but I think he has high potential. I think higher than anyone else in this defensive front, to be honest with you. I think it gets interesting everywhere else. I mean, obviously you mentioned Jack Sawyer. I had him on the breakout list. You could put JT in there too. It just kind of all depends what the pecking order ends up being, right? I mean, Sawyer, his career up to this point, it's been tough break after tough break for him, losing your senior season, torn ACL, all that stuff. But again, you kind of see it. You saw it in the spring game, what he could possibly be. He had that nice spin move for a pressure. But I think, with these guys, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a slower start, for the beginning of the season, but throughout the year, it just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And, I'm curious to see how Sawyer and JT kind of develop throughout the season. But Tyreek Williams, out of everybody, he's the one that I get really excited about.
Look, our standards are just very high here at defensive end. It's not common to follow up the Bosa brothers, with a Chase Young. If you go back and look in history, it's very difficult to get that many elite defensive ends on your team at one time. And then I think I'm not going to say we took it for granted, but that was a nice long stretch there where every game you started, you knew you had that guy out there. It's like it makes you sleep better at night, and you kind of don't realize it till it's gone. The opposing offenses did, I can tell you that much. All right, let's talk about Ohio State versus the field here. Where do you see Ohio State versus the Big Ten? And where do you see Ohio State in the national championship picture? And then we'll take whatever questions I didn't manage to take myself.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned up top, they're a top 2 team nationally, right? I mean, if you told me like you had to pick college football playoff, I would probably take a pen out and put Alabama and Ohio State. Everything else is a pencil. I think I'm pretty confident with those 2 teams. I'm leaning Bama over Ohio State, but I think that pass rush factor is pretty important especially against that Alabama team. I think Bryce Young is the best quarterback in terms of just making plays when knocked off rhythm, and just the overall processing ability that he possesses. It's really rare. But that's not to say you can get some slip ups from time to time, and that's more of like if they make it to the national championship, then you can preview that. But I think those 2 teams, are the top 2, and I think there's a pretty significant drop off after them. As far as the Big Ten goes, I mean, they're obviously the overwhelming favorite. Honestly, the only way they're going to get dethroned this year is if there's just a big time breakout with one of the other top teams. If you look at Michigan, it's got to be at quarterback, and they're going to have probably another 2 quarterback system. Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy, 2 completely different quarterbacks. Cade McNamara, he's a safe game manager, and that's okay. But you look at JJ McCarthy, they got that ceiling. He's got special ability, just the dual threat ability, the arm talent. It's truly special stuff with what he can offer. But can he kind of be a complete decision maker? I think he can be. There was a play against Georgia, just one throw, and I tweeted it out. People can find it. They just search my name, McCarthy. But with the way Georgia was playing, you saw it. He understands the game, so that could be a big deciding factor there. And then after that, I mean, honestly, is Graham Mertz going to be good? I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, Ohio State's, I would be kind of surprised if it's not there. Big Ten's not theirs. But yeah, I think it's a top 2 kind of race at this point. You never know who's going to pop up. Clemson, can they turn it around? Can DJ Uiagalelei turn it around? I don't think he will. It goes to Cade Klubnik. Can he be Trevor Lawrence? I'm not going to ever assume anybody's ever going to be Trevor Lawrence, even if it's the same team and same recruiting status. Can Quinn Ewers be everything he was hyped up to be? He's in a great situation, I think, in terms of just receiving core. Again, I mentioned tackle's an issue, but again, it's a pretty big ask to just assume this guy's going to be the best quarterback in the country. USC, boomer bust team. Utah, can Cam Rising be more than a great quarterback? Because if they want to contend with Ohio State, he's going to have to be spectacular, one of the best in college football. So, yeah, I think it's a top 2 race. But again, I think just everything that I kind of mentioned, that's what makes this college football season so interesting. I think we're in for a lot of surprises this year, kind of like what we were last year.
This is going to shock you, but most of the comments are anti-Spencer Rattler comments, and there's no chance I'm going to put those up here. But I think I'm happy to say that I think we hit everything that everyone has on here. It's interesting. In terms of the draft, do you have any contact with that? Do you have any vibes on that? Do you see, I mean, this time next year, Ohio State's been very fortunate in that we tend to have a lot of Thursday night action. It's changed. Last year was more about receivers. This year, I think you got a very good chance that Jackson Smith-Njigba is picked real high. Draft-wise, if you were ranking the quarterbacks and the receivers, how would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, springtime, that's draft time, down there in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I mean, I'm definitely ingrained in that. Jackson Smith-Njigba's the most confident projection on Ohio State. I think he's right now, if I had to rank a big board, put that together, he's a top 10 prospect, arguably a top 5 prospect. Obviously, I'm not going to say he's going to be a top 10 pick, especially at the receiver position, but I think he has a very good chance to be there. I think there's a pretty interesting race for that wide receiver 1 spot, but I think he's definitely in the best
And you see it as
situation to claim that.
hold on a sec, you see it as him and Butte?
I think him and Butte, you're going to get Jordan Addison in there. I think you could have some dark horses. Quentin Johnston from TCU. He's got a really rough quarterback situation. He's different from Jalen. A lot of people are going to be like, oh, what happened to Jalen Reagor? It didn't turn out so well. But he's different from Jalen Reagor and what he has to offer. He's pretty rare in terms of just the size and speed that he has to offer. I really do think that he could possibly bank a push for it. But again, I think I would be pretty surprised if it's not Smith-Njigba, Butte, or Addison is one of the first wide receivers off the board. But again, a lot can change. I know Ohio State fans, want to hear me say, but like Jameson Williams, for example, a lot can change.
Sure.
I think it's kind of a wild card there. Everyone, in terms of quarterbacks, like I know that list, I said it's not a pro projection, but honestly, it's Bryce Young, Rattler, and Stroud. Like those, if I had to say, be comfortable with placing them in a top 32 of a big board, those are the only 3 quarterbacks that I'm comfortable with putting in the top 32. I've seen the Will Levis of Kentucky hype, Phil Dracovic of Boston College, Anthony Richardson of Florida, Tanner McKee of Stanford. Those guys have a ton to work on. It's fascinating to me that everybody hates Spencer Rattler, but they love Will Levis. Will Levis is what what Spencer Rattler, he wishes he could be Spencer Rattler Spencer Rattler's so more far advanced, right? You have a guy that's pretty similar, but a little bit further along, and you just kind of want to kick him to the curb. And I think a lot of that has to do with like the made up stories from a personality aspect, the Netflix documentary, whatever.
I was just going to say that. His narrative was bad from the start. They think he's a prima donna.
Yeah. There's nothing people love more to do than just to group up on one person and hate on them for some reason, right? Everybody loves to do it.
I believe that's called Twitter.
Yep. It's Twitter. It's not a real place. But I'm on there a lot. But yeah, it's fascinating. But again, a lot can change with the quarterback situation. We saw it last year. But I think those 3 guys, if I had to do a top 32, these are the only ones that I think are close. I could see why people are infatuated with some of the other guys, but again, I think they all have significantly more issues to work on.
All right, people, I'm going to cut it off there. We had Anthony for 49 minutes, and I will guarantee you this. When he agreed to do this, he did not expect to be on here for 49 minutes. So we appreciate it greatly. Look, these are his opinions, man. He's watching the film. We had some questions on here. Does he watch the film? That was one thing I can guarantee you. You can see that I'm in a more well-lit room. He's in a dark room with windows open just now in the film room. These guys, you may not agree with it, but you cannot knock the hustle. PFF has gone behind the scenes big time. Like you said, I think people think PFF is a Twitter handle rather than a large company that does this. And like you said, the lion's share of their effort is done behind the scenes, kind of like how we have Scouting Ohio and Mark Porter, and 90% of that is going by payment to college football teams. So we really appreciate Anthony stopping by. Hopefully he will not read any of the comments about some of the stuff that he said, so that he may have any interest in coming back. So Anthony, we really appreciate it, man. And we'd love to have you back maybe midway through the season to check on your rankings.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate all the kind words. I'm used to it. I got thick skin at this point. And honestly, I trust me, guys. I watched the film with our database. It's the easiest way to watch film on the entire planet. If I didn't utilize that, I would be just a horrible human being. I watch film religiously. That's what I do in my free time. Ask my fiance. She hates
Yeah.
it. But anyway, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed it. Ohio State, got to say, I think they're one of my favorite fan bases. Definitely passionate. There's no doubt about it.
They call them Bucknuts for a reason, or Bucknutters for a reason. It's not Buck Rational Observer. We appreciate Anthony stopping by. Have a great day, Bucknutters.